Hey folks, Dave Temple here. As you know, my podcast is all about talking to the best thriller writers in the world. Now, while I don't put myself in that category of the best, I've certainly got my hat now in the ring. And after nearly 3 years of hosting this podcast, I think it's time to toot my own horn, if you will. So with that, I'm offering my thriller, The Poser, for sale all this month. It stars Detective Pat Norelli, a rookie cop working the overnight beat in Hollywood when one of the town's biggest stars is found dead in her Hollywood Hills home only hours after winning an Oscar. Beloved by her fans, Pat thinks someone wants this star dead and sees this as a way to forge her own path and get the promotion she craves. I'm proud of the response I've gotten from fans, and I'm confident you're going to like The Poser. So for the rest of this month, you can get the ebook for only $5 or the paperback for $14. Since I do this weekly podcast as a free service, perhaps you'd consider this as a way to help out a fellow thriller writer. There are two ways to reach the link. First, you can go to davidtemplebooks.com, scroll down to see The Poser, click, and you're on your way. Or head over to Amazon. You can find it there. Again, davidtemplebooks.com or Amazon. Thanks in advance for your support. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to The Thriller Zone. I'm your host, David Temple, and on today's 156th episode of The Thriller Zone, I am thrilled to say that international best-selling author Tess Gerritsen will join our podcast. You know Tess from her Rizzoli and Isle series, her medical thriller standalones, her suspense novels, her romantic suspense novels, and now her newest release, which happens to be the first in her new Martini Club series, The Spy Coast. From medical doctor to New York Times bestseller, please welcome Tess Gerritsen. Well, a great big welcome to Tess Gerritsen here on the Thriller Zone. Hi there.
Hi.
It is an honor to see you and to meet you. I'm telling you, one of the biggest and the best. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, it's always fun to talk about books, isn't it?
Yes, it is. This book right here, I'm going to drill down deep and steady on it, but I do want to say, I saw you at BoucherCon just months ago, and I knew then that you'd be the perfect fit on the podcast because between you and Lee Goldberg going back and forth.
Yeah, I know. I would love to go on the road with Lee Goldberg. He's like, I'd be the straight person and he'd be the fun one.
He's one of those guys, and it's not about him, it's about you, but he's one of those guys that makes everybody feel like they are the most important and they're the funniest in the room, which is a gift in and of itself, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, no, he is the funniest man I know. He really is.
So anyway, it was great to see you there, and I knew instantly that you'd be a good fit. And if I had been thinking ahead and I'd done my homework in advance, we would have sat down and grabbed a little quick face-to-face there, because then I ended up following you on social media and seeing you hang out with everybody. So it was totally cool. And a great event, right?
Yes, I love BoucherCon. And that was my hometown, San Diego. So it was great to be there.
That is my next note. Were you born and raised here? Was this like from day one, right?
I was born at Mercy Hospital in San Diego. Yes, I was. And I grew up there, went to high school there, and left for college, and then unfortunately never went back. But I'm living in a good place now.
Well, that was the other question is, and Maine figures prominently in the book. So tell me about, real quick before we jump onto the book, of course, it's a vast difference between San Diego and Maine, but what has been the biggest difference to you and the thing that you like the most about your new locale?
Oh, the lack of traffic. There is no traffic here. The trees, those seasons. I love the seasons. I know Californians think, oh yeah, I have the best weather in the world. And yeah, it's nice, but there's something about that first snowfall. And I think it's just a really creative place to be.
There's some magic to seeing the seasons change. And, somebody asked me one day, what's it like living on the West Coast? And I said, well, it's everything great that you think it is, but there's a little bit of Groundhog Day to it.
Yeah. I sort of feel like I can feel the year passing much more acutely because, first of all, when do the leaves change?
Right.
When is that first frost? And there's always something new to look forward to when it comes to the weather.
Yeah. Well, I've never been to Maine. I hear nothing but wonderful things about it. So good for you. And you've been there
33
several.
years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, now I know this is a very busy week. We're on a truncated schedule. You got places to go and people to see and things to talk about. So we're going to jump right into the Spy Coast. Now, before I tell you some of the thoughts that I have, for those who don't know yet, let's hear that glorious elevator pitch about this Spy Coast.
A retired chicken farmer in Maine turns out to have a secret past. She was a CIA agent, and suddenly she's being called back to the old job because a dead body is found in her driveway.
You know, that when you start out the pitch with chicken farmer, you think, oh, what is this going to be? A Little House on the Prairie or, something like that. But no, folks, don't be thinking that because it's got everything that you want.
Including chickens.
Right. And you know what's funny, Tess? For some reason, you made me want. Said to my wife as I was reading the mug, like, babe, what if we were to get some chickens? It sounds so cool.
They're fun. They're fun animals, and they give you eggs.
Yeah, and you still do this to this day, correct?
Well, no, my son was a chicken farmer. He had
Oh,
70 chickens, and I would babysit, chicken sit his
chickens.
flock every so often when he'd go on a much needed vacation. So I know something about them.
Yeah. Well, I want to say, without a doubt, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, this is one of the best books I have read this year.
Well, thank you. I put a lot into that, I have to say. And there's a lot about Maine in there, which I love too.
And not only, I'm going to take it one step further. I think it's easily one of the top 10 books that I've read since I've started this podcast, which is now we're approaching 2.5 years. And
Wow.
I've read a lot of books, Tess. And the reason I love it so much is, and forgive me if I sound cliche, but this book really does have it all. Because you've got the spies and the intrigue, which is surprising as it sneaks in. You've got humor and colorful characters, all of which that are burned into your memory by the time you've done, along with enough murder and mayhem to please every little mystery writer. But the little wonderful love story that you have at the core is pretty amazing.
It's kind of heartbreaking too, but I mean, not to give away any secrets, but that love story is really is at the center of the whole thing.
Yeah, and matter of fact, and on the heels of what you just said, because boy, I do not want to ruin it, because folks, you're going to pick up this book and you're going to read it. I promise you that. But at the end, because I always make notes, and a lot of people who have problems with me, I'm always bending corners and highlighting and drawing, scribbling in it. That won't offend you, will it?
No.
At that point that we learn a certain something upon which you just referenced, I put a huge OMG in there, and I'm like, daggone it, Tess caught me. I did not see that coming. But there are so many little, you do something so wonderful, and I'm going to gush a little bit because I can't help myself. First of all, this Maggie character, your central character, the chicken farmer, man, I want to spend years with her.
Yeah, and what I love about her is that she's we're getting older, and it's fun to think about these retirees who really are all around me here in Mid-Coast Maine who've had intelligence backgrounds, to think about how they are capable, they're smart, they could outthink the rest of us, and yet they are their superpowers that they are misunderstood and dismissed.
Yeah.
So it's fun to think of old people who really have it all, but don't necessarily show it.
Well, the word that comes to my mind as I was dwelling on this is refreshing. It's so refreshing to find someone writing about characters that are seasoned. I'm going to use the word seasoned.
Yeah. Yeah, and part of the fun also was this conflict between Maggie and her group, which they're in the 60s and 70s,
Right.
and the local police woman who's in her 30s, who she's a little bit arrogant because she's a youthful cop and she thinks she knows her town and she thinks she can handle everything. And then she comes up smack against these 60 and 70-year-olds and thinks, who are these people and why are they always one step ahead of me? So that, that challenge of youth, misunderstanding you or underestimating you, that was a lot of the fun, this conflict.
The underestimating that Joe did. You're absolutely right. Oh, it's always, and it's the same thing. And I think this is interesting. As I was looking at these season characters, the Martini Club, and I was wondering how much of this, Dave, I'm asking myself, how much of is it because you don't get to read anything quite like this book these days, A, or B, hey, ding dong, you're that age now, so that's why you're relishing it.
Or it's my age now. That's why I'm writing it. But you're right. It's not that these stories weren't interesting for all time. It's that the industry, whether it's Hollywood or whether it's publishing, has always thought that everybody wants to read about young people. That Hollywood wants the young faces, the pretty faces, and who cares about somebody who's 65 or older? And I think that cultural belief is emanating really from Hollywood, because when you look at British television or British books, they are perfectly willing to feature older characters. We just don't do that in this country.
And it's sad. It's so friggin' sad. We watch, my wife and I watch a lot of British television, and I'm with you. And I never stop and think for a single second, oh my gosh, they're so old. I look at, there's a, what's the phrase? There's a believability and wisdom that that this character is bringing to the party, and I just flat out like it.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I was completely addicted to this show called Foyle's War. I don't know if you ever watched that.
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. So it's about a middle-aged detective during World War II, and as the thing goes on, I mean, I think the show was probably filmed over 10 years, and Foyle gets older. Starts to work with MI5. And you think here, as you see the age show up on the actor's face as he, normally goes older, you also feel like you're seeing the wisdom growing in that face. And by the end of it, though Foyle may have been 65, I was in love with him. So it turns out that what we really love when we read these books and we watch television, we love the characters. We don't love their physical features, but we love the wisdom that they have.
And a funny thing you just made me think of, and this is so indicative of your style, I think. I'm a newcomer to your work, and I found myself researching every book you've written, so now I've got to go back and catch up. Thanks a lot. But I love the fact that there is a wisdom and a depth to these characters, and I found myself going, oh, I want more of that. And the way that you treat the book, oh, it's so fabulous. You're in the present, and then you're going back, and then you're telling it from one person's perspective, and then another. And a lot of times, I read a lot of books that this can get confusing, and you're like, oh, geez, here we go again, another trick. It didn't feel like a trick. It was completely seamless. Everything stacked on the next chapter perfectly. It was just so elegantly woven.
It is a challenge doing this past and present structure, and it was the only way I could actually tell this story, though. But you're right; it can be very confusing, and you can't really do it too much. But I think the point is, just as it's time to go back into the past, there's something in the present that sets that up. And it feels like it's time to go back and look at what Maggie did 17 years ago, because that is the relevant point in the plot.
And I think that maybe is your biggest gift. And I'm going to hit this here in a second, so I don't want to jump ahead of myself. But it's the timing, and it's such a delicate balance. I have read books that do this before, and it feels convoluted, but you don't do that. I'd like to step back a second and go, I know that you started off in the medical field. You wanted to be where you were a doctor. And I find that so fascinating, because very few times do I run across a doctor who says, I'm going to chuck it all and be an international best-selling author. Tell me about that process.
I wanted to be a writer when I was 7. So that was my first goal. And but I have, I had really conservative parents who said that's really a hard way to make a living. You should go into the sciences. Anyway, I ended up in the sciences, and I loved medicine. I love science, but that writer instinct was always there. So when I went on maternity leave, I'm home with my kid, my sleeping son, and that's when I wrote my first book. So it was this confluence of motherhood and getting time away from the hospital and finally having the time to daydream and play around with the possible book that got it all started.
And that just triggered a thought. When you get to meet all these characters and they're all delightful and they're fully developed and they're robust and people in your past who you can kind of relate to. But I love the fact that a lot of times thrillers will shoot out of the gate with this big, bad, bloody explosion, murder, etc., fill in the blank,
Mhm.
and then spend a lot of time on that. What you do is kind of the opposite. So you drop this bomb, so to figurative bomb, and then you just delve into the story and you use the word characters. It really is all about characters. So what you're doing is you're so fully engaged in the characters and the life and their history that you almost forget and don't even worry about the fact that, yeah, there's a murder that's going on and I'm going to go hunt this person down.
Well, I have a problem with thrillers that are slam bam action from page 1 to page 350. Um, and it comes, I guess, from watching a lot of James Bond films. When I watch James Bond films, I find that as soon as the car chase happens or the fight happens, I get really bored. You know, okay, so they're squealing around and maybe somebody's getting shot, but that's not what engages me. What engages me is really good dialogue. And I'm thinking about one of the Bond films where the most riveting part was this dialogue between James Bond and the woman that he's falling in love with on a train. And nothing's happening. It's just the two of them talking. That is what gets my juices running. And I think it's what gets my juices running when I'm reading books as well. I'm very bored by action.
Yeah. Do you, this is a technical issue. Do you spend, I'd love to know your process if you don't mind. Just a real quick thumbnail sketch of kind of how long it takes for you to go from gestation to first draft to that period where you go, okay, this feels really good and I'm going to hand it off to the editors.
Oh, it's my sheer chaos. That's about all I can say. I'm a seat of the pants writer. I start off,
No.
yeah, I start off with the voice of a character in my head, really, and it was Maggie Bird. And the one thing she said to me was, "I'm not the woman I used to be." And I thought, okay, let's find out who you used to be. So that's where the whole book started. I knew it was about spies in Maine because, and I don't know if your listeners know this, but I live in an area with a lot of retired CIA agents. And I was wondering what retirement was like for them. I mean, what if you get called back into the field? What if you've got to strap on a gun again after 20 years? And what is it like with your creaky joints to try and be James Bond again? So that was what drew me into the story, but it was really Maggie Bird. And I knew from the very beginning that she was a sad woman, that some terrible thing had happened on her last mission. And it was she who was showing me the way. I'd get to a point where I was in the present day and something bad would happen. I think, okay, this is related to her past. Maggie, what happened? And then I would feel very, very natural to me to go back 17 years and see what she was up to. So it was a chaotic thing. I was letting the character tell me what was happening, and I have to say that because I don't do a any kind of a synopsis ahead of time, I tore up a lot of pages. I probably wrote 2 to 3 times as many pages as were actually printed because they all ended up in the trash can. But that's just the way it is with me. I write myself into blind alleys, and then I don't know how to get out, and I have to figure out what I should be doing next.
But that doesn't bother you because that's your process. And evidently, with 30 novels, 40 countries, 40 million copies sold worldwide, you got a pretty good idea what you're doing.
Yeah, and every time I get to that point where I'm blocked, I think, how did I do this the last time? It's every book has been a struggle for me because I always hit that wall, halfway to two-thirds of the way through the first draft when I don't know what happens next. But I also have learned after 32 books that I should trust myself. I should trust myself that I can claw my way out of this cave I've ended up in.
Yeah. Excuse me, 32. Yes. By the way,
I don't remember.
another one degree of separation. So you created Rizzoli and Ives,
Mhm.
which was just a fantastic series and long running. And I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina back at the time when,
When
oh my
Angie
God, what's that?
didn't Angie Harmon move there?
When
Yes.
Angie moved into town, and she would either bump me or I'd come in right after her for voiceover sessions. And I thought, I mean, at this time, she was one of the biggest stars in this tiny little town of Charlotte. And I'm like, what are you doing here? Well, I like it here, and so forth and so on. And I was like, oh man, and what series? And then she told me, then I followed it. I'm like, oh, who's this Tess Gerritsen? Let me learn more. And here it is now, years later, and I'm reading your book. So it's just a really cool, fun way to,
Well, that is funny. Yeah.
yeah.
She's a goddess, isn't she?
She's stunning on like 7 levels
Yes.
because not only is she breathtakingly beautiful, but it's her, the way she walks in the room and makes you feel like, hey, let's get to work and have a beer and have some laughs.
Yeah.
And you
Texas
don't
girl.
expect that. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, as you're thinking about picking this book up, there's a few people who say a few things about our friend Tess that you might want to hear. Now, when I ran across this blurb from Stephen King, where he said on the cover of one of your books, Tess Gerritsen is an automatic must read in my house, I was like, first of all, you don't hear that kind of accolade very often from Mr. King. And what did that make you feel like? And I'm trying to remember. I want to say the book was Gravity. I think so. Tell me about that.
Um, well, that was pretty amazing because I was a long-term reader of Stephen King before that. I mean,
Yeah.
anybody who read The Stand is going, "Oh my God, this man is a genius." Yeah, so I was really I was amazed by that because I didn't know anybody had given him the book Gravity. And that was actually Gravity is an example of how I'm all over the place. I mean, that was science fiction, right?
Right.
Um, and then I've written medical thrillers and historicals and horror and everything else. But yeah, that was a great moment to get called that King had said that.
We as writers, I write myself too, not to your degree, of course, but we all sit around and go, oh, what would it be like? And I have had more people on the show, and I'm trying to think. There's a couple people that have been on the show recently. Don Winslow is the first one that popped into my head, who said when he read of a particular writer, oh, geez, what? And he's reading this guy, and I won't pull that name out right now. And what am I even doing writing? How can I possibly compete in this world?
Yeah.
I thought that a little bit about your book. I'm like, it's so perfectly crafted and so when your eye can slide across across the page, you're not getting caught up in a lot of the little tiny technical things that we all know about but don't really study too much. You just get lost in the story. I want to ask you, do you have someone when you read them you go like, oh, I can't possibly compete with this?
Oh, this happens all the time. It's really, of course, you would ask me the names of these authors because immediately their names go right out of my head. Um, and oh gosh, um, I'm thinking about writers that so inspired me and so swept me up that I couldn't stop reading. One of them was Larry McMurtry. I think
Oh,
that was one of the first books, Lonesome Dove, where you just forget about the writing. You just get into these characters and you follow these characters. And I think he was the one that really opened my eyes to fantastic writing.
and there are, this is what amazes me. This is going to sound like I don't know what it's going to sound like. Who cares? There are so many books out there right now, so many people trying to make it in this business.
Mhm.
And a lot of those books come across my desk. And I say to myself, how does one compete in this world? And then again, you read your kind of work, and I go, how do you compete? And then I go, right about the time I want to kick myself, I go, well, wait a minute. There's going to be somebody somewhere that likes my particular take on something. And so either it's a, either it's a little magical way to keep myself in the game. I mean, do you ever have you have to have those days somewhere you go, all right, this is a little
Yeah.
piece of crap.
Well, I say that all the time. I mean, this, look at my first drafts. They are really a piece of crap. And I guess we can say that on your show. Um, but I think that what I've learned over the years, I've been at this so long, is that I'm not competing with anyone. I'm,
Yeah.
I'm writing a story because my characters want their story told. And when you get to that stage where you don't worry about the sales anymore, you don't worry about the reviews, you just write because you love this character, Maggie, and you want to know why is she so wounded, and you write for the joy of it. That's when you can really let loose and be the best writer you can be. We have to love what we're doing, because there's so many ways we will get discouraged, so many things that will make us want to stop. And I'm thinking of writers who spend 5 years, 10 years writing something from right from their heart, their very best. This is all they've thought about. This is their life. And then finally it gets published, and some lady in Peoria writes her review on Amazon, and it's a 3-letter review, meh, you know? And
Yeah.
that's what we have to deal with are the people who don't like our books, the people who won't buy our books, the reviewers who hate our books, the editors who don't want to buy the books. You have to love what you do and do it regardless of what the world tells you.
Well, this almost sounds like my closing question, which we're getting very close to. So I'm not going to mention that. I'm going to go back to one more quote that I heard, and this one just jumped off the page at me. I think it was the Chicago Tribune. Tess has an imagination that allows her to conjure up depths of human behavior so dark and frightening. She makes, I love this, Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft seem like goody two shoes.
I'm not scary. I am not scary at all, I swear.
And I got to come back to Maggie for one last comment before we bounce. Is I so love this character. You know, I don't often fall in love with female characters for whatever reason. I don't know why, but she has this way, and I hope this is a compliment, because as I was starting the book, I felt almost a kinship to Sue Grafton's character way back in the Alphabet series. And I'm like, oh, there's that familiarity. It's you get to get inside her world that has nothing to do with outside of her world. And you just want to know what her world is, if that
Mhm,
makes sense.
mhm. I think it helps that I wrote her in the first person.
Yeah.
There are a lot of readers who hate first person narrators. I love them because you're right. You really feel like you are inside their heads and see the world through their eyes.
Why do I know this is kind of rhetorical and or you don't know the answer, but I beg the question, why do people have a hard time? Because I found it absolutely delicious because I got to inhabit her.
I don't know. I don't know. I love first person, but I will see sometimes, in the review. I shouldn't be reading reader reviews, but that is one of the it was one of the complaints. I hate first person, and I read it despite the fact it's first person. Readers are funny. They have their own little quirks, and I have a lot of people who were very upset that Maggie had to protect her chicken flock and had to shoot a fox. I mean, a lot of people saying, "I'm not reading this book."
Because you shot a fox, which was endangering your livelihood.
Right.
All right. So as we begin to wrap, there's two questions I have. One of them is, and you got to tell me, Tess, if you had to describe what I call your secret sauce, because you clearly have one, it's very obvious. What would you say it is? And this pertains to both pulling in readers as well as having a prolifically astonishing body of work. But what do you suppose if someone said, "Oh, what's Tessa's secret sauce?" What do you think that would be?
Digging for the emotional core of who your characters are. I mean, I try to think of what I'm feeling with every scene I write. What are they feeling? What is what is driving them? It's not the murder. It's not the technology. I don't care about gadgets, and I don't care about crime scene personnel so much. I want to know what you're feeling. And I think that's what draws us forward.
That is so spot on and so excellent. And when you were describing earlier about that you're sitting and listening, almost channeling Maggie, I've tried to describe this to my wife, Tammy, who is the absolute opposite of me, which is probably why we work so well. She is spreadsheets and documents and logistics. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, but what about this idea? But when we first got together, she'd say something to me about, how do you know such and such? I'm like, I just sit and wait and listen for the character to talk to me. And she looked at me like, am I making the right life decision hooking up with you? Because
The voices, we love the voices, don't we?
we do. All right. And the last question I always close with, and a lot of the listeners who follow the show are writers, either up and coming or seasoned like yourself. But what is your best piece of writing advice? And I know you kind of hinted on it a little bit earlier, but I'd love to hear it if you have that one thing that goes, yeah, this is my best advice to you.
Finish the book. So that's all. There are so many writers that never finish their book. They'll get halfway and they'll get discouraged and they'll think, "Oh, I'm going to go try something else." I would tell them to just forge ahead and get to the end. You can fix everything. You can figure out a way to make something better, but if you don't have those words on the page, there's nothing to fix.
And that's so good, by the way. And you probably don't ever stop and think, oh, am I hitting the right number of word count?
Yeah, it's just really all about the story. But
Yeah.
I admit though, I do look at how many words I have written. I mean, because all those word processing programs, they tell you, right? They tell you how many words you've hit, and I will look at that, and you want to hit the minimum that your editor is expecting.
And is there a minimum these days? What are all the cool kids doing these days, Tess? What is that norm?
I don't know. I think actually cool kids are thinking books should be shorter. And it's not because of us. It's not because of our storytelling. It's because the reading public has just got they've got no concentration.
Yeah. And sadly, dear, I think this is happening everywhere. I mean, this podcast started out at like an hour and a half, and now everyone's like, can you make it shorter? I want to listen to it. But, same with books. How about a half-hour podcast and a 280-page book?
Yeah, well, that acronym TLDR, too long,
didn't read. Yeah.
Yes, I think I'm feeling that from the public a lot.
Yeah. And perhaps a little bit about social media too, but that's a whole different conversation.
Right. Yeah.
Once again, the book is The Spy Coast. And if you want to learn more, go to tessgerritsen.com. All that information will be below. But Tess, once again, a superb, beautiful, friendly, fun, sad, romantic read. I loved every page of it.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for jumping through hoops. I know this is a busy week, and the book is dropping as this show is dropping, and we wish you the hugest success you can possibly have. And once again, thank you for joining us on the show.
You were great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks again, Tess, for a wonderful time. Now, let me tell you about the next superstar who joins our November Women Thriller Writers Month. Marjorie DeLuca, known for her bevy of suspense, historical thrillers, and sci-fi for teens, Marjorie will talk with me about her latest thriller, The Night Side. That's Monday, November 20th on The Thriller Zone.
Your front row seat to the best.